So, a lot of people have heard of you from the whole Shoezeum thing, but explain to everyone what your history is with sneakers.
Well, I always loved Nikes ever since I was a little kid. My dad used to run marathons when I was a kid, so I would go with him to the sneaker stores when he would buy shoes, and he would teach me all about them. And I grew up in the 80s in the Michael Jordan era, so I fell in love with Michael Jordan and Air Jordans. Fast forward to the early 2000s, and I was in graduate school, I was in law school, and I was at a swap meet on the weekend, and I stumbled upon a bunch of old Nikes, and they were $20 each. And I looked at these shoes, and they were amazing, like Air Force Ones and Huaraches, OGs from back in the day, perfect condition. And I bought these shoes. At the time, I only had $300 to my name. Took all the money out of my checking account, gave it to this swap meet vendor. I actually bargained him down to 15 bucks a pair, and he gave me 20 pairs of shoes. And I took them home to my one-bedroom apartment. I took pictures of them, and I posted them on eBay. And the shoes sold a week later for about $75, $100, $120 sometimes. And I would get that money back and go back to the swap meet, buy more shoes. I did this for a few months until the swap meet vendor just disappeared. No longer started going to the swap meet anymore. I had to figure out a new way of finding shoes. So I started going to the malls and eventually to the outlet malls. And it was at the outlet malls where I really struck gold. Like, I could walk into these different Nike outlets. Each store would have 20,000 shoes, 25,000 shoes. And I would just really pick through everything on the floor and make friends with the staff and ask them to look in the back. And it was like, my goal was to go into each store and get 100 pairs of shoes. And I figured, just based on sheer math, if I'm looking at 20,000 shoes or 25,000 shoes and I'm uncovering every rock and trying to figure out what shoes are underpriced that I can sell for more online, I would do that from one to the other store.
So how big did this get?
Well, at first it was in a little one-bedroom apartment. Eventually I needed to get a storage locker. Eventually my storage locker turned into 7 storage lockers. And then my storage fees were so high that it made sense to get an office. I rented a 1,200 square foot office. Within 3 months, it was bursting at the seams, and I ended up subleasing office space from the neighbors all around me. And I'd have little shoe holes basically in other people's offices. And eventually that office wasn't big enough and I was back to storage. So I have an office and now all of these storage lockers. Eventually I had to move to a warehouse, and at my peak I had 15,000 pairs of Nikes that I personally hand selected.
Okay, so if you looked at those 15,000 pairs of shoes, what would be the average price per shoe, you think, in terms of what they were worth, roughly? 100, 150, 200?
The retail on them was anywhere from 100 to 150 or 160 bucks.
And the resale?
But when I was selling them on eBay, I really wanted to give incredible deals on incredible shoes. That was my internal motto. So I wanted to make sure that the shoe that I sold was a top of the line or close to top of the line shoe, and that it was discounted. So really it was probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $60 to $70 a shoe at 15,000, which was roughly about $1 million.
So you now have $1 million worth of shoes. You have a staff that's helping you ship the stuff out and list it and everything else like that. What happened next?
So I was building my business while I was in graduate school. I'm an attorney and I also have my MBA. And when I was studying for my MBA, I really learned how to build and grow a business. I graduated with my MBA in '05, and now I'm done with school, and it's all shoes, all the time. The outlet stores opened at 10 and closed at 9, and I spent from 10 to 9 at outlets or on my way to the next outlet. I did this for a few years until in May of 2009, Nike banned me. They sent me these letters.
Okay.
One of them was sent to my warehouse. Another was sent to my home. And the letters basically said, "Thank you for your business over the years. We've decided that we're not going to sell anything to you anymore. We're not going to take returns from you anymore. And don't talk to anyone that works at Nike about this." I was at an outlet store as they were closing the door at night, and I bought the maximum of the stuff that I could buy, and I didn't have anyone with me to buy more. And I went home and I was thinking about the product that I had left behind there. It was actually some Nike SB belts that were $9.99 and these zesty beach volleyball shoes. They were made for the Beijing Olympics. They were $1.99. $1.99 for these. They were like the gloves that you would put on your hands to do the dishes or like to clean something gross, but they go on your feet. And they were $1.99, and I was selling them for $45. And the belts I could sell for about $45 too.
Okay.
So I closed down the outlet store. I buy 10 pairs of the beach volleyball shoes. I buy 10 of each belt. There were 3 different belts. And I go home, and I left behind probably 10 of each. When that happened, what I would do is I would have one of my employees go to the store the next day to clean up the mess that I left behind, because my time was more valuable going to another store to look through their 20,000 shoes to see if I could find 100 or 200 or whatever.
Okay.
So I send my employee out to Viejas, and I was about to go to another store, and I get this phone call shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's my employee, and she's like, they won't sell me these belts or the Zesty volleyball shoes. They won't sell to you anymore. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, you're done. Like, they're cutting you off. And I'm like, what? I go, why don't you take the day off of work and just go and enjoy yourself? I had a staff of 4 other people at the warehouse, and I didn't want her coming in and telling all of them that this was over.
Right.
So I said, go take some time off. Let me like figure this out and think about what I'm going to do. About 10 minutes after we got off the phone, there was a knock at my warehouse door, and it was FedEx with one of these letters banning me. And I was like, oh shit. So I looked at my staff and I sent them home. They didn't know the letter had come, and I was like, why don't you guys take the day off? And I just had to like digest all of this and figure out what I was going to do. I went home. 10 minutes after getting home, FedEx again with another letter. And I'm like, man, Nike is not messing around. Like, are they going to follow me around all day and keep delivering these letters to me?
Can you go ahead and read the letter that they sent you?
Yeah, of course. Dear Mr. Geller, we have determined that Nike Retail will no longer sell products to you or accept returns from you at any Nike-owned retail location effective May 19th, 2009. This also includes any persons you ask to purchase or return products on your behalf. We appreciate your business over the years. Nike makes all decisions about the sale of its products strictly from our own independent point of view. Please know that Nike sales persons are not authorized to discuss this decision with you, so please do not seek to engage them in any way regarding the future sale or return of Nike products. Very truly yours, John Arbach, Director of Stores.
Okay. Have you and John actually had a conversation since then?
No. So I get this letter, and I call Nike. I'm like, I want to talk to John Arbach.
Right.
503-671-6453. I know their number by heart. I call him up. I'm like, hey, can I speak to Mr. Arbach? They let go of him a day after he kicked me to the curb. Like, he no longer worked at Nike, like almost immediately. Interestingly, I had a guy that was working for me that was like my right-hand man. And I trained him on the ins and outs of everything. I mean, everything I knew. And I actually hired him to travel the country and buy shoes for me.
Okay.
And it's funny because I was reading this letter, and it says in here, you can't ask people to purchase shoes.
Right.
And I was like, okay, I'm not going to ask him. Like, I'm going to tell him. I'm going to be like, dude, you're losing your job if you don't go and buy shoes for me. I'm not asking anyone to do anything.
Right.
And really, this guy's going to be at the stores asking me if he should buy the shoe.
Right.
So like, it was sort of like
That's the loophole right there.
a little loophole. I was like, well, I'm not going to be asking him because he's going to be asking me. He's going to be calling me and saying, hey, I'm in Kissimmee, Florida, and I'm looking at these penny twos, and they're $59.99. Should I buy them? And I'm going to say yes or no. So I kept him traveling the country.
Okay.
And he did it with his little brother, with his cousin. He always had one homie with him so that he could buy 10 and his buddy could buy 10. And also, it's like a pretty daunting thing to travel the country in a minivan buying shoes and shipping them back to California, which is what he was doing.
At what point did you realize that the business just wasn't going the way you wanted it to go?
My employee on the road just wasn't good. He wasn't waking up early enough. He wasn't getting to the stores when they opened. He wasn't producing the same kind of numbers that I would produce.
He wasn't you.
It wasn't his passion. It was a job that he was doing sort of against his will.
So at this point, things aren't really working out with your employee.
No. It's very stressful. He's on the road. He's calling me all day and night. I'm convinced that there's 100 pairs of good shoes at every outlet. He's trying to convince me that there's only 10 pairs of shoes at the outlets if he's lucky.
Right.
We fought the battle for about 9 months. It was 3 separate trips that were about 2 months each. He would go out for 2 months, come back, and I would train him based on what he did and what he didn't do, and then I'd send him out again.
Okay.
In the meantime, I was trying to find shoes that I could resell as well, and I was going to Foot Locker. I was also going to all of the mom and pops that I grew up going to in LA. I was in San Diego and I would drive up to LA, go to Sporty LA, go to Sammy's Sports, just a lot of these little like hole in the wall mom and pop places, and I would shop through their old inventory. And then I would go online and buy shoes from other e-commerce sellers and resell them myself.
At what point did you decide to just shut down the business?
My buddy and I had a meeting in July of 2010. So actually, it was over a year from the time that I was banned to when we both sat and had lunch, and we were just like, this isn't working. And it was mutual. Like, this guy did not want to get in that minivan and drive to Florida any more than I wanted him to go and do it. You have to remember, I was going to outlets that were 15, 20, 30 miles away from me, maybe 50 miles in a Prius. So there were like no costs associated with me going and filling my Prius with shoes and bringing them back to a warehouse. Now I've got this guy in a Ford minivan, burning gas, driving from state to state, having to stay in hotels, having to eat. Like, it became so expensive.
After you shut down the store, you had the idea to do a museum.
When Nike banned me, I was in a 3-year lease, and I had 23 months left on a lease that was $4,000 a month.
Right.
So my future rent for this big giant warehouse was about $100,000, which was like 10% of my inventory. And in the months that I was there before I was banned, I did a considerable amount of improvements in there. Like, I built all these shelves and racks and like really made the place my home. And now I've been cut off, and I'm looking at this warehouse, and every day we're selling 100 pairs of shoes or 150 pairs of shoes or 200 pairs of shoes. And I'm looking at these shelves, and they're slowly emptying little by little. And this money's coming in. I got this guy across the country who can't spend it as fast as it's coming in. And I'm looking at these shelves, and I'm looking at my PayPal account with the balance, and I'm like, what am I gonna do? And it just hit me that I could use the shelves and the warehouse in a completely new and different way. I could curate the history of Nike and set it up on these racks. I could liquidate all of this inventory that I had worked for years to acquire, and I could strategically build the world's greatest Nike collection. Actually, what really inspired me to do it was Randy Pausch, the last lecture. Randy Pausch was a college professor who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he was told that he had 3 months left to live. And he decided to spend his life having fun and fulfilling his childhood dreams. He actually made a list of what his dreams were, and he decided that he was going to spend the rest of his life checking off those things on his list. And I read this man's story who was facing death and the way that he was embracing life, and I was like, what am I so upset about that Nike banned me? I have an opportunity to do exactly what this guy is doing, which is fulfill my childhood dreams. And I'm going to do it right here in this warehouse. And my dreams were to have every Air Jordan, and not just Air Jordans, but every Agassi, every Bo Jackson, every David Robinson, every Charles Barkley, every damn shoe that I wanted when I was growing up that my parents wouldn't buy me. That's what I wanted. I wanted a Bronco. I bought a 1973 Bronco convertible. When I was 5, I wanted Garbage Pail Kids. I bought the entire first series of Garbage Pail Kids. I wanted Michael Jordan rookies. I bought those. I used all the money that I had made on eBay to buy everything that I ever wanted as a kid and curate the history of Nike so that I could tell the history of Nike, tell my own personal story, but more than anything else, tell Nike who they banned.
Now, at one point you got unbanned.
So after I built the Shoezeum, I started making videos and taking pictures and sharing the collection online. And eventually I made some DVDs that I sent to the executives at Nike. I went on Nike's website and I found out who their executives were and who their board of directors were. There were 100 executives and 12 people on the board of directors. I hand wrote 112 letters to these people. Dear so-and-so, my name is Jordan Geller. I have a 9,000 square foot warehouse in San Diego. I built the first Nike museum. Come experience it. I sent a DVD. Everything actually looked like a golden ticket, like a Willy Wonka ticket to a factory. A couple months later, Mark Parker, Tinker Hatfield, Nelson Ferris, Rick Shannon, Michael Lemming, like the top of the Nike pyramid, boarded their private jet and flew down to San Diego for a tour. And this was on March 21st, 2011. It was about a year and a half after I had been banned. It really took me about a year to build the Shoezeum.
Okay.
These guys show up at my door. I give them a 3.5-hour tour. I walked them into a world that they had created. They were mesmerized. Tinker Hatfield had tears in his eyes, and he was thanking me profusely for bringing back the best memories of his life. Ultimately, Nike ended up leaving that day. They said, do you want to come to the airport and check out our private jet? I was like, definitely. So we go walk up to the jet. It actually looks like a Nike spike, like a track spike, and there's little spikes underneath it. It says 6453 on the back of the jet. As we were walking up to the jet, Mark Parker looks at me and he's like, you think you know so much about Nike? What are those numbers on the back of the plane? I look at him, 6453. I'm like, that's Nike on a phone. He gave me a fist bump and he was like, yeah, you got it. I mean, I've called Nike a million times, so 6453 is something that I'm real familiar with. So anyway, I walk them to the jet, the executives board the jet, and Eric Sprunk says, let me walk you to your car. Eric Sprunk is the COO of Nike.
Okay.
He walks me to my car and he looks at me and he's like, Jordy, it is very important to Nike that the Shoezeum remains exactly as it is, exactly where it is, exactly as it is. Now, my lease had already expired. It expired in February, and I was able to convince my landlord to let me stay February and March in exchange for my security deposit. And Nike came on March 21st. Okay. So I had 10 days left, and I refused to take down the warehouse until I was able to share it with Nike. I was like, I spent a year building this place. This is my everything. I'm not taking it down until they come.
Okay.
So they came and they leave, and Eric Sprunk is walking me to the car, and he's telling me how important it is to Nike that this remains exactly as it is. So I said, okay, I'm going to call my landlord, and I'm going to tell him that I want to extend the lease, and we'll see what happens. I go home, I call the landlord, who I had reached out to a few months prior and said, come to this warehouse and see what I built, and I was able to convince him to let me stay for 2 more months. I'm like, Nike came, Nike came, Nike came. They want to keep the warehouse exactly where it is. Dude sends me an eviction notice and sues me. Tells me that if I'm not out by April 1st, he's suing me for $150,000, which is the future rent of the building. So I reach out to Nike and I'm like, oh my God, he's playing hardball with me. He's telling me he's gonna sue me and evict me, and he puts for lease signs all around the outside of the warehouse. Nike says, we'll take care of it, and they ended up signing a 3-month lease with my landlord for me to stay. Nike paid my rent. They paid $16,500 for me to be there for 3 months. The landlord was very opportunistic. He raised the rent on Nike and then included a clause that every month the rent goes up by $500. So after Nike was done with their 3 months, now my rent was $6,000 a month for July, and I bit the bullet and I paid it. And I wasn't generating any revenue to have this on display. And now with that rent and the overhead, it was just not making sense to keep doing this. As I packed it all up, I reached out to Nike and I was like, hey, is it cool if I shop at your stores again? And they unbanned me. They sent me an email saying, you're welcome back in the stores, but follow the rules.
Jadakiss, man. That dude is old school dude, OG in the game. So he got stuff for years that you haven't even seen.
My favorite sneaker, the all black sixes, the original jump off from the championship and shit like that. Those are my favorite releases. But I got a pair that I didn't have for so long that I play ball with them still sometimes. I wear them out. They twisted, but they from the first era of them. So